All right, in this episode, we are talking about Tinder, LDS dating, and singles wards. Before we get into the topics here, though, I want to introduce a new sponsor to Cwic Show, and that is Cardio Miracle. Cardio Miracle is something that I've been taking now for a few months. It is definitely something that works. It is science-backed. It is a nutritional supplement that is full of nitric oxide. If you haven't learned about nitric oxide, look into it. I have put this on the homepage on Cwic Media. You can click on it there. I've put together about a 10-minute video on the research that I've done and on the experiences that I've had with nitric oxide. Cardio Miracle came to me and asked me to, if they could be a sponsor for the program. I said under two conditions, right? That I would try it out myself. I've gone through a lot of different health supplements over the years. Some were garbage, some were good, mostly garbage. And so I wanted to experience it for myself, go through it and try it out, see what the benefits were. Had a huge drop. I really did. I had on average, a 20-plus point drop in my blood pressure, which is really important for me. And then there are some other things as well. So go to the homepage or go to the link in the video here to listen to the video that I go over and explaining why Cardio Miracle is a sponsor now of Cwic Show. And I'm hoping for a long-term relationship here because it is something that I do believe in. The page does take a little bit of time to load right now. We're trying to fix that. So give it just a little bit of patience, and then up will pop up a video and some research and some other things on some science-backed research from, for example, the National Institute of Health, which is a government, what do they call that? It's not an agency, I don't remember, but it's nih.gov. And take a look at it and see what you think. All right, so Tinder. There was a PhD student that is studying evolutionary and social psychology that's been on a couple of podcasts recently, and he gave some data on Tinder. His name is Rob Henderson. And as I was listening to this, I was kind of fascinated with it. It's completely beyond my world, right? I was married at 23 years old. So I haven't dated since I was 22. And, when I was at BYU. So, it's been quite a while. So it's a world I'm not familiar with. And so when I hear these things, the psychology, the sociology behind it is always very interesting to me. But it brought up some other thoughts that I've been having on putting together for Cwic Show, which were LDS dating and singles wards. And so I thought I'd just bring these together here because I think that they kind of mesh as, at least in my thoughts, they kind of mesh. And I think that there's a certain thread that follows through all of this. So on Tinder, here are some of the data, and this is fascinating, from the most popular dating app out there, which is Tinder. Women, right? You got the women's profiles on there. You've got the men's profiles on there. Women, you either, and by the way, if you're not familiar with Tinder, you're going to swipe left. If you disapprove of the person, right, you get a picture and maybe a little bit of information from them. You can take a little look at a little bit of their profile, their bio. And then you're going to swipe left if you're not interested. And then if you are interested, you're going to swipe right. So you can just stop and think about it. And many of you experience this all the time, whether it's on Tinder or whether it's on Mutual, which is an LDS dating app, or others, that this has completely changed the dynamic of dating. But here's the data. Women swipe right, say yes, they're interested in knowing more about you. They swipe right on 4.5% of men's profiles. 4.5%. Men, they swipe right on 60% of women's profiles. What does that tell you? right off the bat. We hear a lot about, well, men are so picky and when it comes to looks, and they probably are more picky when it comes to looks. But as far as the little bit of information from the look and then the bio, so education, interests, especially education, job, income levels, different things like that, women are much, much pickier about who they want to date. And it's proven, right, sociologically, that women are going to date across and up in status. And when we say status, what does that mean? That's social status, that's economic status, that's education status, all of those things. And men typically date across and down. And so you have all of the women that are trying to date up in those status areas, especially income and education and of course, social. I guess it's hard to know on Tinder if their social skills are that great. But that is a massive disparity. 13 times. I think I'm right on that. Roughly 13 times the number of profiles that men swipe right on over women. And so let's think about the disparities here and what the consequences of that are really very concerning for everyone who's using dating apps and for our civilization, but especially for those that are dating, right? And it's here's what you need to look at. Number one, if women are dating are swiping right on only 4.5% of the males, what is the competition level for the women? What competition level is there for them going after those 4.5%? Because what they're saying is 95.5% of the men I have no interest in, at least on a dating app. 95.5% the average woman has no interest in, only in those 4.5%. So for women, there's a much higher level of competition. And we can look at it in this way, that for morality's sake, for the family's sake and its future, when there are fewer men as far as just population, and when there are fewer men in an environment, the sexual morality drops considerably. Because the competition is for the men. They hold the cards. And so the women are going to be a little bit more available, we'll say, on average, for the men. If it's the other way around, if there are fewer women and more men, then that reverses. And actually, what we would call the law of chastity, right, is held on to stronger when there are more women and there are fewer men. Or excuse me, the other way around, when there are more men and fewer women, because the competition now is toward the women. So in this example with Tinder, the 4.5% of men, really it's as if there are only 4.5%. And so you can imagine what the dating scene does and how that changes sexually, right? And the sexual practices of those that use dating apps. It's not going to go in the right direction. And it doesn't. Okay? For men, oh, by the way, going back to the women, there's a higher level of competition, which means what? Which means that they're not going to find a good match as easily. In fact, it's going to be extremely difficult if they are only going after those 4.5%. Because all of the women are going after those 4.5%. Right? So it decreases the opportunity for lasting relationships and for marriage. On the other end of the spectrum with the men, where they're swiping on 60% of all of the women, all of the profiles that come up to them, well, you've got 95.5% of the men that are hardly getting any matches. Hardly anybody comes to them. So really the app becomes much more again, and a win for the 4.5% of men, and all the women that are competing for those 4.5% men. And so the men who aren't finding many matches, the other 95%, what are their chances for marriage? What are their chances for finding a match that's on there? So that's a very interesting dynamic, and it's a very interesting power dynamic that develops with a dating app. It seems to me like it is a horrible experiment socially for us. It is going to be more anti-family. It is going to be more anti-marriage. And there's more to it than that. Think about the men. This last generation or two has been brought up in what Jonathan Haidt refers to as safetyism, helicopter parenting. So failure is not an acceptable thing. You don't ever want your kids to go through failure. It's the trophy for everybody type of attitude, right? And now they move on into dating, and as adults, what are they looking at with a dating app? Well, there's no rejection. They don't need to worry about rejection. You don't need to go out and ask a girl that you just met on a date. You just simply wait for a match to pull up and then see if you can talk to them. Then there's a little chance for rejection down the road. But up front, breaking the ice, there's no opportunity for that. And so it just reinforces the idea of the safetyism. There aren't risks that need to be taken out there. But let's say for the guy that may not check the boxes that would end up in those 4.5% at the top, but they're very sociable and really command a crowd, and they're very attractive in that way, right? People like them a lot. And their strength comes in the ability to work with people. They're people persons. And if you were dating someone face to face, or you've met them for the first time, that man for the first time, and he was funny and he was sharp and intelligent and articulate and things that you may not see on Tinder, on a dating app, well, you're going to miss out on that. Things that could be very attractive to a woman. And so those things are going to be very difficult for men to bring across, I think, that don't check the boxes of the 4.5%. And I want to ask this, and yes, I'm going to broach the subject here. And maybe many of you that are on dating apps or in single wards I would love to hear from you in the comments on YouTube on this, on all of these points, by the way. But in the church, I would guess because there is more of a searching for an eternal companion and things that would be more spiritually, characteristics that are more spiritual, I hope, to some degree anyway, then those numbers might change a little bit. Maybe it's not just the 4.5% that the women are looking for. Maybe it's a little larger. Maybe it's 8%. Maybe it's 12%. I don't know. But I would imagine, I would love to see, for example, Mutual, right? The dating app Mutual. I'd love to see their stats on how many women swipe left and how many swipe right. How many profiles of men they swipe right on. Or what is it? It's up or down, I think, on Mutual. So, but again, if that's the trend, and it's going to be similar to Tinder, I mean, come on. It might be better numbers, but it's going to lean that direction. And it's not like in the church we don't have a culture where women are like, okay, I'm looking for the perfect thing here, at least to some degree. I mean, I'm looking for the spiritual guy. He's successful. I want to start a family. Can this guy be responsible? Does he have a strong testimony? Did he go on a mission? Does he have a good job? I mean, those things are going to matter. And so you're looking for, if not perfection, you're looking for something, you want them to check the boxes. So if that's the case, is it the same thing with, I would imagine to some degree, to a close degree probably, there's the same level of competition for women toward the men. And as we've talked about with men and where are the men in the church in the last few weeks on this podcast, there are fewer active males in the church, single males in the church, than there are women. And so that may very well actually exacerbate the problem. Maybe it is as bad as Tinder. I don't know. But are law of chastity issues lowered a little bit? Are the boundaries, the standards dropped a little bit? Because, let's be honest, right? I mean, it's in the church, so it's not going to be nearly as bad. But I'm guessing that could be an issue there. And again, in the church, what is if you're using a dating app, and I know there's a lot of success stories on the dating app. I'm not saying they don't work, but what are the chances if the numbers are the same way, where women are only swiping on a few of the profiles of men, then aren't we decreasing the chances of marriage? And aren't there more men that are left out, and women that are left out? Right? The women because of the competition, the men because you don't swipe on them. The women don't swipe on them very much. So is that creating more of a problem? I want to hear back from you on that and talk a little bit more about dating apps in the church. And like I said, I'm not part of that world, but I'd be very interesting to get the feedback from you on how that works and what the dynamics are there. A couple of more stats here or data here that I think is very interesting overall, and this has to do with Tinder again. We're going back to Tinder. But education is a very big deal for women, for the man to have an education. If a man has a master's degree and not just a bachelor's degree, I don't know what the numbers are between a bachelor's degree or no degree, but if they have a master's degree over a bachelor's degree, they are 2 times more likely to get swiped. That's interesting. Master's degree maybe, but if you move to PhD, that is certainly no determining factor of income at all. In fact, it might decrease if they have a PhD. So at least with that variable of income, that may not work. That may come back around here once you move toward PhD. But at the same time, if women are looking for a man with a master's degree, well, look what's happening to higher education. We talked about the disparity in environments where there are more women than there are men. Well, you don't have to look any further than the university campus. We are already overall close to a 1.5 women to 1 man ratio on undergraduate, right? We're in the very high 50s, 57 to 59, it's 60% in some places. You move into high graduate degrees in graduate schools, the number does go to 60% and oftentimes higher for women's attendance, for the number of female students as compared to male students. And the projection right now is that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a full 2-to-1 ratio in undergraduate studies, because men are looking at education more and more, and they're saying, this doesn't seem like it's for me. This doesn't work real well. This is not built for me. This is not an environment for me. They're having worse and worse, young men are having worse and worse experiences academically in high school, because more and more the curriculum and the policies and procedures of the schools, K to 12, are moving more toward the girls than they are to the boys. Just go to a high school awards ceremony and look at the disparity. Huge difference, huge discrepancy. So if the women are looking more and more for the men that have the degrees, especially graduate degrees, and there are fewer and fewer men going to higher education, going to college, and especially to graduate school, then again, if we're looking at the apps and we're going to be that superficial with it, then you're going to get a smaller and smaller number of men that the women have the highest level of that they're seeking at the highest level. That's another disparity. We might be looking at 4%, 3.5% soon if that's the case, of the number of swipes that women have on men's profiles. And by the way, in our university campuses nationwide, where we already have the revolution of the 60s and 70s with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the more women we have on campus and the fewer men we have on campus, which is the trend. I mean, again, just think about that. 1.5 female students for every male student. That is that's a recipe for disaster with new adults coming in away from home, and the morality levels that are going to easily decrease because of that ratio on those campuses. A couple of little tidbits here on the Tinder app. I went through, no, I do not have a profile now or an account, but I went through the process of setting one up because I was really interested to see what questions were asked. Here's a couple things here. With Tinder, they ask for what are your passions, which is kind of your interests, right? What would you put up there on your profile as interest? And I could choose 5, but they were already set for me, right? I had to pick these 5 that were already preset. I couldn't type one in. And it was really interesting for me to look at that because, somebody my age that would have been going back to my dating time, I would have, 75% of what was up there. Okay, maybe 50% of what was up there would not have been even applicable, I don't think, in my time. And so much of it had to do with, newer technologies, gaming, cosplay. It had anime and manga, which are Japanese animations, and a lot of different esports. There were a lot of different things like that. And then game specific, Fortnite. Is this what? Are you really into Fortnite? Are you really into, and it had a couple of other games that were on there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's a huge change. And of course, things like social media are on there. And are you really into social media and other things like that? But then I looked at Tinder and I thought, this is not for right-leaning people. Here's some of the things they have as examples that would lean left as a passion that you would choose. One is pro-choice. Of course, there's no pro-life. There's voters' rights. There's LGBTQ plus rights. There's feminism. There's Black Lives Matter. Activism, which is 98% usually referring to those on the left. Environmentalism. But nothing on the other end of any of those things. There's nothing. Country music was one. Maybe that is a determining factor of someone leaning right. I don't know. But it doesn't seem to me like Tinder wants right-leaning men and women to get together and populate the world, because there's nothing on there that would lean right at all. Now, in Mutual, it's a little bit different, right? You have things like phrases like "find your eternal companion." On gender options, which there were several on Tinder, they simply had male and female. One thing I noticed on Mutual, and I didn't notice on Tinder, I probably had to go through and get an account to get through further, to build the profile further, but it had height. So that's an issue, right? It's just like women like taller men. And if you've got a guy that might not be as tall, but has all the other characteristics that you would want, strong testimony, smart, articulate, good looking, everything else, maybe you don't swipe on him, right? Because it's just going through it's like a data siphoning. It's like, you're just going through these things and saying, well, I can throw away all of these different profiles to narrow down exactly what I want. There's your 4.5% of men. And on the men's side, it's just not as picky. Right? They're not as picky. They're not looking for that level of perfection, I guess, that the women are looking for. Another one on there would be, return missionary. How often do you attend church? So how active are you? Just some interesting things that you would find there that are obviously LDS specific. Another question I would have for you that are in the dating scene is, how often do you date? My kids, and this was recently, overall, I've got 4 kids, and over the last, going into dating ages, we're probably talking about, maybe the last 10 to 12 years, right? What is the... Well, with them, they didn't date very often. They went to homecoming, they went to prom, things like that. But dating outside of that, it was almost non-existent. Instead, you basically hung out with groups. And so the ability to be one-on-one and develop those one-on-one skills with someone of the opposite sex, for those groups, and I'm guessing it's even maybe more difficult today in dating, that those skills are not developed, not even going in through high school. And even if you're waiting till you're 16 to date, those last couple of years of high school, not a lot of dating going on. I'd be very interested to get your feedback on how much you dated in high school. And again, when I say date, I mean one-on-one, right? One-on-one. Or, you can put in there a couple date too, right? But, did you go on dates one-on-one? I went on dates one-on-one, and it was good for me. It was a smart thing to do. I had to develop certain skills and get out of my shell a little bit in order to do that. And I wonder also about social media and how much this is affecting different groups and affecting everybody overall in terms of narcissism, right? There's some data that's out there. This comes from a study called Egos Inflating Over Time, a cross-temporal meta-analysis of the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. This is in the Journal of Personality. And this was in reference and in context to social media. And in there's a very interesting finding on narcissism, and that is that men have always been more narcissistic than women. And that gap has been very steady between men and women in narcissism. But since social media came about, so we're talking about the last 14 years or so, the iPhone came out in 2008, that gap has decreased substantially. And it's obviously, I believe, related. It moved with social media. And I'm trying to figure out, why would that be? Why would that change something in that? Our men aren't moving down, right? They're just as narcissistic as they've always been. But women have moved up closer to men in that gap. So would love to hear what your thoughts are on that. Why has that gap decreased? And how would social media affect that? And then lastly, this is a topic that I've thought a lot about and over time, and I don't think I've covered it previously, but going from Tinder and mutual to dating, and now let's bring up singles awards and talk about singles awards. I don't know the answer to this, but my thought on this is that they are a net negative. And I know that there are so many good experiences there, and there are positives, right? Where everybody gets a calling, and that's one of the reasons people talk about that. I really don't know how well that works. I think you probably would do just as well in a family ward with that. And I know many people have met in singles wards, and that's been important for them. I met my wife at the only young adult fireside I ever went to. And so, as far as an activity at least, that's a big success story for me. And I went to singles ward when I was at BYU. And then when I was back home in the summers from BYU, which is where I met my wife. But when I grew up in high school and before, they didn't have singles wards. And those single young adults would be in the family ward. And I remember growing up, and even as a teenager, always kind of looking up to those people. And they were very active, and they were, at least the ones that were there were very active and involved with the ward, and they had their own young adult activities, and they were announcing them all the time. I remember always from the pulpit on sacrament meeting, they're always announcing the young adult activities. But they were in the ward, and they were Sunday school teachers, and they were youth advisors, and they were young men's presidents, and they were, Relief Society counselors and teachers and all of these things. And here's why I think it's a net negative, and obviously you can't get around it in a college town. When you take, especially the younger single adults, right? You're talking especially like early 20s, and you have all of these new adults that haven't had as much experience in life, being an adult and paying bills and seeing what the world is really like, and you put them all together. There's a little bit of a never land syndrome, I think, that takes place, because there are fewer mentors, and there's just a difference, I believe, when you go to church on Sunday and there are children and there are teenagers, and maybe you're in primary, maybe you're working with the youth, or just being around them, being around families that struggle with the kids, that have successes with the kids. You see the interaction with them, and you've got what you're looking for in the future right there with you, working side by side with you. And I look, at least in the singles wards I went to for the short period of time that I was single, it's just not even close. The level of involvement, the level of sacrifice, the level of experience, obviously, that you have there in that family ward. And it just seems to me that is a better environment for you to go to church in. It's not a better environment for your activities. And there should be definitely lots of those activities, a regular basis where you can meet each other, and then where there are maybe even larger regional events, right, that you would go to, and you can meet more and more people. But I think you have here's the numbers on 18 to 30-year-olds. And I've brought this up a lot, and I haven't actually brought the number up on this. But the numbers are not good. And the latest study that I've seen, and this is with thousands of young single adults, is that you have an 18% activity rate. 18%. So if you don't have more involvement, and you don't, would it be worse than that in a family ward? Because before you can say, well, we have better experiences, we meet more people, you can't do that if you don't have people that actually go to church. And this is consistent with, I've got a few friends that are bishops or in the bishopric in singles wards, and I've asked them the same thing. One of them's right at 18%, one's at 16%, and one was, I think, 18 or 19. And so this is a pretty consistent number. That survey, or that study that was done with an 18% activity rate, is with thousands of young single adults, 18 to 30. That's atrocious. That is atrocious. And I know the adversaries working very hard, and people are being peeled out from identitarianism and of course any other things of the world that would pull them away from the church. But would it be worse if they were in a family ward? So I would love to hear your arguments for and against this. Here's a couple of comments I've gotten previously, right? One, from a single brother: abolish them, those singles wards, and just have family wards. YSA, other than college-specific wards, and MSA, mid-single adults, are toxic and do not elevate. They stagnate. Family wards give members more purpose and more callings. I agree with this. Just from my experience in working around that, and then obviously being in that for a few years. Here's another one from a single sister. Shut down the single wards. Singles need the example of family wards. And that's what I think. This idea of we're going to section these people off. If you're a young single adult or a mid-single adult, we're going to section you off out here. And I think that that's somehow going to be a better approach. I don't get it. I honestly don't get it. And maybe there's something I'm blind to. Very possibly. I don't see it. But I don't understand the reasoning for doing that. The most important thing is to solidify your testimony and have mentors and examples around you. This is what I want to be. This is what I'm around. I see this. It's a different world. In church, I mean, again, I'm just talking about church. It's a different world if you're not in that family ward. I mean, what if we shut down the singles wards and we increased the stake and area or regional activities? You know, what would happen there? How would that work? I know in my ward, as an example, wow, we could really use the young single adults and the mid-single adults in that ward. I mean, they'd all have a calling instantly. And so it's not, that's the number one concern. But you look at the family wards, they're missing out on a lot of key people that could fill callings and strengthen the ward. And it seems to me like that would just kind of strengthen everybody. What is the argument for singles wards? What are the best arguments for singles wards? And what are the best arguments for family wards? And are singles wards a net positive or are they a net negative? Would we have a higher level, or at least not a worse level, of active singles in the church if they were in the family wards? Because if that's not the case, then if we're looking at singles wards for matchmaking, that's not what church is about. Number one, that is not what church is about, matchmaking. And yet, the activities that go along with that could definitely go, obviously, toward that end. I know that something needs to be done as far as messaging, maybe policy, for helping the young single adults, because that activity rate has got to change. It's got to change. Thanks for listening.